All right, the King James Bible is the perfect Word of God. You can read it, believe it, and apply it to your life. It will show you a pathway for salvation and how to live a life that is pleasing to God. When all others are falling short and letting you down, the Word of God will never let you down. So, I wanted to share a section of a book that I'm reading. The book is called A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. I highly recommend it. It's one man's account of the bubonic plague, the Black Death, that moved throughout the city of London, England. And it's a journalistic account of human behavior, how people reacted, how the society dealt with the Black Plague. I don't know if you guys know, but my wife often carries around a little bottle of thieves oil. And my wife said, I think the essential oils that are used to make thieves oil are eucalyptus, lemon, clove, rosemary, and cinnamon. And so it has a very unique smell, but back during the bubonic plague, people would put that on their hands when they would loot the dead. I don't know if you guys remember, there used to be Monty Python skits where they would say, bring out your dead, and then they would make a joke about the guy's not dead yet. Well, that actually happened. The journalistic accounts of a story where a man was thrown upon the dead cart, and they were carrying it to where they buried the dead, and he was not dead yet, and he woke up, and he had to move all the bodies off of him, and it was quite a story that was covered in this book. Also, I believe the tradition to bury somebody 6 feet deep came from the bubonic plague, where they didn't want the bodies to infect the living. Of course, the Great Fire of 1666 occurred the year after the plague. And then we know that the plague, they say, was not really spread from human to human contact, was more of an infestation of fleas on rodents and rats and small animals. But what I found interesting about this book, and I'm about 60 to 70% done, and I plan on, reading the rest of it, is the way it describes human behavior. That people tried to make money off of the plague. They became sorcerers and witches and fortune tellers and snake oil salesmen. And they would go out in the street and they would try to profit from people's death by selling their predictions, their fortunes, and snake oil. You also had horrific stories of caretakers who were, trying to do their best to take care of the sick, and yet they would get sick as well. And sometimes they would be punished because they suffocated their patients early without letting them die naturally. And that was examples of that was covered as well. And then also the tyranny of the town, because it covers the statistics. And you might have 800 die in this section of the city and 300 die in this section of the city. And it talks about one evening, 3,000 died in one night, and they all died between 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., which was almost a divine thing, that many people would die within a couple of hours in the middle of the night. So the thing that I found interesting about this book is the way that humans reacted to the plague and how it moved across the city and the country and how people dealt with it. You had entire towns make laws that said, we will not allow any strangers to come in our town. And if you did try to come into town, they would kill you, because they do not want to be infected. And a large number of people moved away from the city and into the country homes, and you better not try to approach their home because they would think that you are carrying the plague and they don't want to be infected. So as you can imagine, the tyranny that happens, medical martial law, they're referring to it now. But of course, some people became delirious. They don't even realize what they're doing with fever and, the symptoms of the plague. And they would just run throughout the town naked and infect others. And they would have sores all over their bodies. So it really was quite an accounting of the bubonic plague in the city of London in 1665. And how people were assigned, they would hire The poor folks, once a person died in a house or was determined to have the plague, they would have a watchman that would be responsible for watching that house and making sure that nobody goes in and the person with the plague cannot come out. And it was quite an ordeal, as you can imagine. But one thing that I want you guys to hear, I'm going to play this small little section, is this guy recounts the sorcerers and the Merlin the magician and the witches and the voodoo doctors, and his recounting of how they were dealt with, once the plague had done its most damage. But here's his words. I want you to hear this. Give me just a second. All right.
One thing I cannot omit here, and indeed I thought it was extraordinary. At least it seemed a remarkable hand of divine justice. That is, that all the predictors, astrologers, fortune tellers, and what they called cunning men, conjurers and the like, calculators of nativities and dreamers of dreams and such people, were gone and vanished. Not one of them was to be found. I am verily persuaded that a great number of them fell in the heat of the calamity, having ventured to stay upon the prospect of getting great estates. And indeed their gain was but too great for a time, through the madness and folly of the people. But now they were silent. Many of them went to their long home, not being able to foretell their own fate or to calculate their own nativities. Some have been critical enough to say that every one of them died. I dare not affirm that. But this I must own, that I never heard of one of them that ever appeared after the calamity was over. But to return to my...
Okay, I hope you guys picked up on what he's saying. Because if we do indeed have to suffer a pandemic moving across this earth, and who knows if God will allow that to happen, there will be people to try to make money off of you. There will be people try to increase their own estate. Who knows what kind of snake oil salesman they may try to sell you, or what voodoo, or I will predict your future. And there will be people that will look for anything but God. They'll look for anything but the Word of God. And they'll go to these conjurers and these fortune tellers and these magicians and witches. And they'll say, please tell me my future. What must I do to avoid the plague? And it'll only cost you so and so much money. And what this man has said in a journalistic account of the real bubonic plague is that once the plague moved through his section where he had personal experience, none of those people were around anymore. That it's very likely they were taken out by the plague. And I just don't have a lot of respect for witches and magicians and fortune tellers. Anyway, take care. I do recommend the book. It's been very informative. There's nothing new under the sun. And I would expect if mankind does have to face a pandemic again in the future, that there's a lot to be learned from A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. But there's even more to be learned from reading, believing, and applying the King James Bible to your life.